What is up YouTube, and welcome to this Sweet Tooth breakdown, recap and ending explained. The show is based on the comic book of the same name written by Jeff Lemire, and there are a few differences here and there which I will point out, so please do be warned for spoilers. Sweet Tooth follows the adventures of Gus. Gus is what is known as a hybrid, a child born half animal and half human. Gus's animal half is a deer, but many other children were born with subtle to almost full animal features like Bobby. These hybrids were born around the same time as what is known as the Sick, a virus that was deadly and wiped out most of all humanity and plunged the world into chaos. In the Sweet Tooth universe, this is known as the Great Crumble. Now, throughout the show, we follow three stories. Gus with Big Man, aka Jeopard, Amy and her zoo or sanctuary for hybrids, and Dr. Singh, a man lumbered with the burden of trying to find a cure for the sick, and spends the season trying to force himself to experiment on the hybrids, which is unfortunately seemingly the only way to try and make a vaccine for this horrible virus. Now, I really liked this show. I absolutely adored and was addicted to it. There were problems with it, but I could not stop watching it. I really wanted to know what was going to happen next. And I really liked how it was a bit different to, of course, the comic, where we had sort of parallels to what we had in real life with, the whole scanners for the temperature. And we even had a man in one of the later episodes convince himself that this is all a government conspiracy, and he was standing there vaping while not wearing a mask, which I'm sure many of us have seen people like that. Now, humans blame the hybrids for the sick, as both events happened pretty much almost at the same time, but Gus was born before all of these. And the ruthless military group known as the Last Men are rounding up the hybrids, but they are actually dissected by Dr. Singh's predecessor. Dr. Singh in the comic was already as he was at the end of the show, experimented on people. However, the show gives him a much deeper backstory, showing that he was forced to experiment on hybrids by Abbott, the tyrannical leader of the Last Men, because they took his wife, who was actually sick. Now, Abbott is played by Neil Sandilands, which is an amazing actor, and you may recognize him from The 100 or also The Thinker. Dr. Singh's wife got sick when the world collapsed, but he would later move on to live in his house in his neighborhood, which would be determined to carry on as it was, but murder anyone caught with the sick and tie them up and burn them in their house. Very, very brutal. Now, he heads to a restaurant turned clinic, but the physician there was trying to work on the cure and keeps making different strains of a vaccine, but they all eventually fail over time. Now, she actually hands this task to him as she says she's dying, which, she's not, and Abbott would later confront her in the show, which would lead him to Dr. Singh. He would learn that the key to the cure lies in the DNA of the hybrid. He would then be forced to do this when his community find out that his wife is sick and their neighbour is dead in the clinic freezer. However, the evil Abbott does save them, as he was also searching for the research that Dr. Singh inherited. I really like this change, giving the crazy doctor more of a backstory and reason as to why he was doing all this. However, not all stories are created equal, as we flip back and forth to each of these stories, with Amy's by far and away being the weakest. She lived a boring, normal life before the collapse of society, but she moved to a zoo and worked on trying to save hybrids, and eventually would have a hybrid left at her door, which would turn out to be Bear's sister. In the comics, these children would end up being taken by the Last Men for experiments, which we saw at the end of the show. Now, the core of the story does focus on Gus, and he starts out the story with Papa, who he believes is his dad. His father teaches him to never go beyond the fence and run away from all humans. They do live a pretty idyllic life, all things considered, except they would then be marked by a human, and the father would later die from his sickness. He would then meet a big man who would give him candy and seems to be a poacher, and Gus earned the name Sweet Tooth for eating all his sweets. We would later learn that this is Jeopard. He is a former Last Man and was an American football star pre-apocalypse. It's a change from the comic where he was a hockey enforcer. His wife was pregnant and she gave birth to a hybrid, and he would later join the Last Men but escape. Now, Gus is searching for his mother, and he only has a picture of her to go by. The chemistry between Jeopard and Gus was superb, as Jeopard tries to get him to Colorado, where the mother is, but he sends him on his own, although they are captured but saved by a tribe of hybrid saviors. And after a back and forth, Gus learns that his mother is in Red Rock, Colorado, and he hits it off with a leader called Bear. However, Bear does lose control of the tribe, not wanting to murder the former last man, Jeopard, and they go off all together and live a happy ever after life. No, they don't. It turns out his mother's best friend lives at the house they were getting to, and in flashbacks we get to see the story of his father and mother meeting. Now, his father was a janitor at Fort Smith, where specimens from Alaska were brought in and experimented on. Now, his mother, Birdie, would say they were working on vaccines but accidentally created the hybrids by messing up. Gus was the first one, and then came the sick, further hybrids born to mothers in the world. Gus actually stands for Genetic Unit Series 1, and he was stolen from the lab by his adopted father. Now, while Birdie was assumed dead, we actually see her at the end answer the phone from Bear. It's there in the comic. All is revealed after Singh found some research notes and trekked all the way there where Birdie was hiding. It's very, very cool, and I really do like that cliffhanger there, although I would have liked a bit more of what the virus was. And it does seem like they're doing a bit of a different thing with the virus than the comic. I think we see a lot more of the backstory a lot early on here in the show, which I pretty much like. The comic more focused about the journey and everything like that, and this here seems to be trying to do everything at once. Now, Will the Fort was superb, and we here at the channel are huge fans of the criminally underrated show Last Man on Earth. Now, I do suspect the father here of doing something a bit different. I think he might be a plant or something, because he seemed very interested in everything that was going on pre-Great Crumble. Now, upset by the revelation that his parents were not who he thinks they were, and he was grown in a lab, he runs away but inadvertently alerts the first men to his position due to his naivety and gets captured. Now, Jeopard is also presumed dead, but he would later be revived. The major changes here are that in the comics, Jeopard turned Gus in to retrieve the remains of his wife, but would have a change of heart and save him, leading them to go to Alaska. Here, after major characterization for Singh, we see the pair meet. However, Singh does not want to work on him, as he's superstitious due to his wife buying him a deer figure in the early days of his medical career. Singh must work on the cure for Abbott, who wants specific doses to decide who lives and who dies, and also Singh wants to get back to his wife, who's been held captive. However, Amy and the hybrid she protects have now been taken and actually ended up there. I expect this to be just like the comics, where Johnny is going to help some people escape, which is interesting, as in the show that was hinted and we saw him as well. He was the one who was actually helping Singh there. Now, we'd see that, and then they'd head to Alaska to find Birdie and learn what led to the creation of Gus. And there's a lot more here, as it's explained that the sick and hybrids are different sides of the same coin, and I'd hope that this is explored a lot more. However, we also have the tribe of hybrids, which I would expect pop up later. Overall, the show did have major flaws. I found the going between different time periods, as well as going through different stories, it felt a bit messy, and I didn't enjoy all of the stories. I wanted more of the actual creation of the virus and what was going on with Gus. Now, there are some spoilers for the comics which we need to discuss here, as it not only gives us a hint to where the show will go next, but it also explains what the virus actually is and what it really means. Now, admittedly, this is very, very different to the show. The comics and the show are incredibly different, not only in tone, but also a lot of the plot points, as I discussed in the rest of this video. Now, the Red Journal in the comics is also the story of Thacker, a man who took part in an expedition to the frozen tundras, in which the comic reveals there was a mystical disease that would kill humans, but also give birth to the hybrids that we saw in the show. Much like, well, we saw in the show as well. One was born to a Western man and native, which was a deer. Now, Gus has a lot of visions in the comics, and Well, in the show, he doesn't really have these. I believe there's like one or two and they're pretty inconsequential. But in the comics, he does have visions of him going to Alaska and seeing where this virus actually came from. After the hybrids at Abbott's base got free, Bobby would be kept by Abbott, but a few, including the pig hybrid and her sister Bear, would actually reach the north, as well as Lucy, a man that Sweet Tooth and Jep saved. Now, there are some massive differences, because this Lucy was actually a combination of Amy and the woman who preceded Dr. Singh, as well as Birdie. And she actually investigated the virus in the early days and had a relationship with Jep. We know that the virus came from Alaska, and the story of the man who has saved Gus is a lot different, as in the comics he was concerned about what was going on and actually stole Gus and seemingly unleashed the plague that was confined at the present to Alaska. Now, I'd imagine that Gus's creators were investigating the story of Thacker's journal. However, the plague actually came from the tombs of gods, which were disturbed 100 years ago, and the boy that was actually born of, yes, the native and the Western man, was born bringing the sick as a punishment for disturbing them. And interestingly as well, this happened again, just like, of course, we've seen, but it was a repeat of the past when the gods were cloned and Gus brought with him the sick once more. So basically, Gus is the clone of a god and the start of a new race of people, which is very, very crazy, and I'm unsure how this show is actually going to do it moving forward. However, there is an interesting line that is said in the comic where, when discussing this, Gus and Jep talk about it, and Jep pretty much says that, well, it doesn't really matter. It's happened, and it's a load of stuff which no one really knows about. So they're just trying to make the best of a bad situation. Now, while the show has changed heavily, I do wonder how far they will actually go down with this rabbit hole, which, interesting nonetheless. Now, I really enjoyed this show. It was a really enjoyable show, and admittedly, I do wonder why they made it so tame compared to the comic. But again, if you like it, let me know. If you don't like it, let me know also. Let's have a debate down in the comments. Please do drop a like if you enjoyed the video, and do subscribe with notifications on, and I'll see you soon, and goodbye.